Okay, good morning, everyone. Nice to see you. Hope yesterday was a nice break, or you got a bunch of work done, or maybe a little bit of both. I don't know, but yeah, hope yesterday was good. Um, yeah, so it's Friday. It's the end of week 11. Um, it's gonna be a nice weekend, although outside it doesn't really look like it right now. But I think Saturday and Sunday are supposed to be really nice. Um, what was I going to say? Yeah, so we don't have too much time left in the course. We have next week, and then we have the week after. And the week after only has 4 days because the week after Monday's a holiday, not this Monday, next Monday. Um, so we've only got 9 classes left, believe it or not. So we're really close to the end. Um, like I mentioned, we probably won't finish everything that I had hoped to finish. Um, but that's okay. There's always in a course like this, there's always more. We're just kind of scratching the surface of some of these topics and some of these ideas, and so there's no end. You could spend years on this stuff, so it's okay if we don't quite get to everything I wanted to. But yeah, only 9 classes left. Um, Obviously yesterday you were working. I hope you're working on your final paper, so keep working on that over the weekend if you can. um, I think Jimmy asked me yesterday about the outline situation, and so you can send that to me to look at if you want, and I can give you a quick comment or two on it. If you don't need to though. You don't need to send that to me, so it's up to you if you want a little extra help, or if you want a little just a check in to see if it's okay. You can send it to me and I'll look at it. If not, if you just want to go off and do it, then yeah, you can do that too. Okay, so good mornings. KC's here. Good morning, KC. Good morning, Mashid. Good evening, Ivan. Sorry. Good evening, Ivan. Good morning, Karen. Good morning, Jimmy. Good evening to you, Erica. Duong's here. Good morning, Duong. Jenna's here. Good morning, Jenna. And Caleb's here. Good morning, Caleb. Okay, so if you'll if you'll remember from Wednesday, we started talking about ableism, and ableism had to do with prejudice, discrimination, and oppression of people with disabilities. And as I mentioned to you, the social group of people with disabilities is kind of interesting because there are a lot of different people with different experiences um, within them. And it's not to say that in other social groups everyone's the same, but if we're talking about race, for instance, and we're talking about black people fit into that social category because of the color of their skin, right? That's the thing that sort of unites them. And if you're talking about religious oppression and you're talking about Muslims of course are a very diverse group of people, but they have this thing in common in that they all believe in Islam, right? That's their religion. But again, people who fall into the disability category are quite different because of course they can vary on all sorts of those other social groups as well, right? In terms of age and sex and gender and religious affiliation and race, economic class. They can vary like that, but of course their disability varies as well, right? Whereas everyone who is black has black skin, right? Everyone who is Muslim and believes in Islam. But people who have disabilities are vary, right? There's a lot of different ways in which people can be disadvantaged, and so the challenges and the obstacles that they will experience in their life is they vary as well. So it's a complex social group because there's so much diversity within it. Yeah, but let's talk about that. So I reminded you of a few things really quickly, what stereotypes were, kind of reduced or simplified characteristics of a group. Of course, we know that already. And prejudice is where we attach a positive or negative judgment to our stereotypes, right? And we said that can be positive or negative. We said we discriminate when we start treating people differently based on our, good morning, Chun. When we start treating people differently based on our prejudices. And so we could again, we could positively discriminate or we could negatively discriminate. And of course, we can do this intentionally or unintentionally, right? We can discriminate against people on purpose or sometimes without knowing it. Yeah, so I'm just going to skip through this because we've seen it before. And of course, oppression is societal level procedures and policies and structures that serve to advantage one group and disadvantage other groups, right? So we know that already too. We know that these are all the types of oppression that we've mentioned so far. Obviously, some of them we've talked about in more detail than others. And again, oppression is different than prejudice and discrimination, right? Prejudice and discrimination happen on an individual level. Oppression describes how society works, okay, and what the sort of major patterns in inequality and power differentials are. Okay, so we know that. Privilege, well, I'll remind you of this. Privilege is kind of the advantages, or maybe not so much favors, but the advantages and the opportunities that the dominant group gets that are often denied to minoritized group members. Remember that privilege is sometimes difficult to see. For the dominant group, it is often invisible. They don't really realize that they have privilege, and so often people in the dominant group will deny that they have privilege or deny that it exists, because again, when you have privilege, you often don't feel it. Things feel normal when you have privilege, and so it sometimes is difficult to spot and to understand. But we will talk a little bit about privilege as it relates to disabilities here. Internalized dominance, where people act out their dominant group status, again, sometimes on purpose and sometimes kind of by accident. Many of these accidental or unintentional instances of internalized dominance we could call microaggressions, right? And we talked about that during the unit on racism. And so, yeah, people asking kind of, what are you, or, where are you from, or I don't see you as black, or something like that. Those are all microaggressions, because if you kind of dig below the surface and find the meaning in those statements, you'll see that they serve to remind people that they are in a minoritized group, that they're in a less powerful group. And of course, internalized oppression is where people act out their oppression. So when they act out the fact that they are in a minoritized group. And again, the example of Jane Elliott's kids, the blue-eyed and the brown-eyed kids, that's a perfect example of internalized oppression, where the blue-eyed kids actually started to score more poorly on exams simply because they were convinced that they were not as smart, right? They began to act out their oppression. They began to sort of make that prejudicial idea true. And again, they did it unintentionally, right? It's kind of a side effect of how human psychology operates, unfortunately. Right, so ableism then is a form of oppression, right? It's characterized by discrimination and social prejudice against people with disabilities. It also has to do, and specifically with people who are physically disabled. This is where we really see, I think you've heard me mention a bunch of times that, when you have oppression, you have a situation where the dominant group creates society in such a way that it benefits them. And so for people with disabilities, this is particularly obvious and particularly clear. And let me give you maybe a quick example. Think to yourself the last time you went out of the house. Usually I say when you came to school this morning, but of course none of us did that because coronavirus. Um, Imagine the last time you went somewhere. So maybe you went to the store or to a friend's house, or maybe you just went for a walk, or I don't know, you went to last time you were out of the house, okay? And so if you think back to that, or if you want to think about the last time you went to school, that works too. If you think about that, you probably just went to that place and did the thing and came back, right? So you went to school. Let's say you went to school, you were on the train or the bus, or you walked. You probably had your headphones in. You were probably texting the whole time, maybe. You got to school, you sat down in the desk, you listened to the teacher, I hope. You did your work, I hope. And then at the end of the day, you left, you put your headphones back in, walked or hopped on the train or the bus, went home, ran up the steps, into the house, grabbed some food, whatever, right? Now, for someone with a disability, particularly a physical disability, there are a ton of obstacles in their path, right? There's a ton of things that will block them from doing the exact thing that you did in going to school or going wherever you went that day. Depending on the disability, there are stairs, right? There are curbs, right? The sidewalk ends, and sometimes they don't slope down. Sometimes they have a hard corner. If you're in a wheelchair, you can't go off the hard corner. You need you need the rounded off bit, right? So that you can cross the street. But of course, those of us who walk, we just step off the curb, right? You go to cross the street and you kind of look both ways really quick and you go for it, right? But of course, that's because you can see and hear appreciably well, right? And so crossing the street is easy. You can go up the stairs, right? Because there's lots of stairs all over the place, and so you just go up them and you don't even think about it. But for people with disabilities, all of these things can be barriers. Doorknobs can be barriers. If you don't have hands, or if your hands don't work, or they're not strong enough, then you can't open a door, right? You can't go up a curb. You can't go upstairs. Maybe you're not able to go on the bus. Here in Vancouver, we have buses that are that have accommodations for people in wheelchairs, and so the bus kind of lowers down, and sometimes a ramp goes out. You may have seen that. But of course, not all places in the world have buses like that, and so that can be a barrier as well. So if you think about it for a second, if you think about that trip to school or to the store or wherever, it won't take long for you to identify a ton of obstacles, things that people with physical disabilities struggle to do. And in some cases, even getting out of bed and getting dressed in the morning, even though that's it's difficult for some of us because we're being lazy, but even that can be a challenge for some people with disabilities. And so again, the world is very much built for people like you and me. It is not so much built for people with disabilities. And we'll kind of explore that today and Monday, how the world is created for people who do not have disabilities, people who are in the able-bodied group. And hopefully I think it'll give us a clearer idea of what privilege is and what kind of the sort of structural elements of that privilege are, the physical elements of that privilege. And maybe that will help inform some other types of social inequality as well, okay? Right. So ableism is where we sort of discriminate, we have prejudice towards, or we have a societal condition in which people with disabilities are disadvantaged, right? Where they do not have the same opportunities that others have, okay? So when we talk about people with disabilities, I don't know where your mind goes. Often we think of people with a physical disability, and so I think probably the thing that comes to my mind quickest is someone who uses a wheelchair, right? That's kind of what I immediately think of when I think of someone with a disability. But as you can see, there are a lot of different ways in which someone can be disabled. And of course, depending on your disability, that's very much going to change your experience in society, and it's very much going to affect what kind of opportunities and kind of privileges you can enjoy and which ones are more difficult, right? So again, you could be vision impaired, right? So you could not be able to see anything, you could be totally blind, or you could have partial vision, right? You could be deaf or hard of hearing, so you might not be able to hear anything at all, or you might be able to only hear to a certain level or to a certain degree, right? People who are disabled also include people with mental health conditions, and so people with bipolar disorder, which is pretty severe, depression, which of course has various, can be sort of slight or moderate or quite severe, schizophrenia, which is a very serious mental illness, anxiety, which of course all of us experience from time to time, but if you have very severe anxiety, it can negatively affect your life. Various personality disorders, all of these can affect the way that someone thinks and feels and acts, but also of course how society treats them, right? Because maybe we'll talk about that a little bit later. I'll leave that for now. People can have intellectual disabilities, and so depending on a number of factors, sort of during childhood development, or during a time when a baby is growing prior to being born, you can develop a number of different intellectual or developmental disabilities, right? So people who have an intellectual disability may have difficulty kind of living their lives and understanding what's going on, taking care of themselves, regulating themselves and their behavior, communicating with others. All of these things you can imagine affect someone's life. Similarly, if you have an acquired brain injury, so if somehow you have injured your brain in one way or another, that can cause a number of issues for you as well, right? Good morning, Baha, that's okay. People with autism spectrum disorder. So people who have autism or Asperger's, they kind of struggle to interact with other people, and so they struggle to understand their emotions and interpret the emotions of others. They struggle to kind of appropriately communicate with other people, and so of course that can affect their experience in society as well. And of course, physical disability, again, it's the one that most easily comes to mind for me, but it can have to do with their ability to move around, and so people with a physical disability may not be able to walk, they may not be able to use their arms or their legs, they may have difficulty holding things or grasping things, so again, a doorknob would be a challenge, or they might just have very low stamina, and so they might not be able to walk a long way or do any sort of physical work. And so again, all of these different types of disabilities can affect people's lives in different ways, right? So it's important when we think about people who are disabled as a social group, it's important that we think about a wide variety of people. Good morning, Tika, or good evening, Tika. We won't go into this right now, but I think that if we thought about it, we could probably identify stereotypes that are associated with people with various disabilities. But of course, as with all stereotypes, as with all prejudice, as with all discrimination, the stereotypes are limiting, right? They put people in kind of a tiny box, and we start to see people through the lens of stereotypes. And again, that dehumanizes people to a certain degree, and it kind of limits our ability to actually understand their experience, because again, we're seeing them through this oversimplified kind of lens. Okay, so the best way to kind of talk about, well, really any form of oppression, but the best way to talk about this is to actually talk to someone with a disability. Okay, and so that's kind of what I would like to do next. I would like to have us hear from someone who actually has a disability. And so what we're going to do is we're going to watch a bit of a documentary, part of a documentary called "The Ugly Face of Disability Hate Crimes." And so in it, um, in this documentary, we're going to meet a guy named Adam Pearson, and Adam has a disability, which I'll leave for now, has a disability. And what the documentary will do is it will kind of follow him. It will kind of tell his story, and it'll follow him through a series of little adventures, I guess you could call them, as he lives his life as a person with a disability, but also as he tries to grapple with prejudice and discrimination against people with disabilities, and how hate speech is handled. And we talked about hate speech when we talked about Jordan Peterson a couple weeks ago, how hate speech is kind of handled. Um, he'll have some experience with the police, with law enforcement. He'll have some experience with lawyers as he tries to sort of get to the bottom of ableism. Actually, he uses the word disableism, but it's the same thing, ableism or disableism. Um, and finally, he'll talk a little bit to a psychologist at the end and participate in a bit of a psychological experiment, which is kind of interesting. Um, yeah, so there's a few things to sort of see and to talk about here. And so what I would like to do is to direct you to start watching that. And so in Microsoft Teams, I've put the link to the video, and I've put the questions that I would like you to answer. And I think maybe what we'll do is let's watch the first third. Yeah, let's watch the. Yeah, let let's watch the first 25 minutes. Okay, watch the first 25 minutes, and then we'll take a break. We'll take a 10-minute break, and then we'll come back here and talk about the answers to the questions that we've been able to answer so far. Okay, so 35 minutes from now, let's make it 40 minutes from now. So that'll be at 9:10. Okay, so we'll come back here at 9:10, and we will discuss what we've seen and talk about the answers to some of the questions. Okay, so yeah, so go ahead, go to Microsoft Teams, click on the link, it'll take you to the video. We'll meet Adam Pearson, and he will take us through a little bit of some of the experiences he has as he tries to expose disableism or ableism and try to understand it. Okay, so I'll see you back here in 40 minutes. Okay, so enjoy the video, answer the questions, see you soon. Okay, people, and we're back. So, um, hopefully you've watched the first 25 minutes of our little documentary, and as you've seen, we've met Adam Pearson, right? So Adam Pearson is a youngish, I guess, man from the UK, and of course, as you've seen, he takes us a little bit through some of the elements of his life. We see him on the bus, we see him in the nightclub, we see him at home with his mom, and we see him pursuing or trying to resolve a comment that was left on his YouTube page, right? So we see a few things, but let's start off with this one. So, what social groups does Adam Pearson belong to? And in which of those is he in the dominant group, and in which of those is he in a minoritized group? What social groups does he belong to? So how can we describe him? So Baha says he's white. Yeah, exactly, right? He's a white person. That's good. Karen says he's in the disabled group, right? He says very early in the documentary that he's disfigured. He has a facial disfigurement, and he also has some disability, right? He's partially blind. He's partially blind, and I guess you could say his speech is a little slurred because of his lips, but I find him easy enough to understand. So, but he is partially blind, right? So he has some, he has some disabilities, and in that regard, he's in a minoritized group, right? He belongs disabled, good, minoritized because of his disability. Yes, but give me a little bit more on this, because there's more to Adam than just his disabled status, right? Baha's pointed out he's a white guy, right? So, whoops, I said guy. He's a man as well, right? So as a man, he's in a dominant group, right? Men are the dominant group in terms of gender. He's white. White people are the dominant group in the UK. He's disabled, so that puts him in a minoritized group. But what else is he? What else is he in terms of his... do you have any ideas about maybe his religion or his sexual orientation or identity, or his economic or social status, his nationality? What do you think? Because these are all social identities that are part of who Adam is as well, right? So what else? What other social groups does Adam belong to? We've got gender, we've got race, we've got disability or ability. So Karen, maybe he is straight. Yeah, I think so. It's not so easy to tell. I don't think we've seen any evidence one way or the other. If we had to assume, I mean, straight people are the majority, so he probably is straight. He might not be, but if we had to guess, that might be a good guess. He's British, yes. He's a British citizen. He's born in the UK, so he's a citizen. His nationality is British, and so in the UK, of course, that's a dominant group, right? Citizens and native-born people are the dominant group. Karen says, yeah, he looks about middle class, I think. He was over at his mom's house His mom's house looks pretty average, pretty normal. Um, he doesn't look poor. He's not living on the street or anything, but he doesn't look super rich. Doesn't look super rich either. So I think that's a good. Um, I think those are reasonable assumptions for us to make, right? That he's probably straight, probably well, he is British, and he's probably middle class ish. So when you think about it, it's interesting, and this leads into intersectionality, right? The idea that people have a bunch of different social identities at the same time, right? So if we look at Adam, Adam's a member of a lot of dominant groups, right? He's a white male UK citizen, probably straight, probably middle class, and we could probably say he has a Christian background as well, even if there's no evidence of his religious affiliation in this documentary, but he probably has a Christian background. Most people in the UK do. So he's really a member of a lot of dominant groups. Really, the only group that he's a member of that's a minoritized group is the disabled group, right? But of course, as we see, that has a major impact on his life, right? Particularly because he can't hide his disability, right? His disability, as you probably saw in the video, is very obvious from the first minute that he's different, right? There's no way for him to hide that. Okay, good so far. So what do we see? What do we see from people in terms of discrimination? How do we see people discriminating against Adam? Okay, so KC says people staring, judging silently, and bullying through social media. Yeah, so Adam gets a lot of looks, right? People look at him, and we should probably say that some of those looks are probably understandable, right? He does look significantly different from your average person, and so if you some guy riding by on his bike with music. If you saw Adam on the street, you might look twice, right? Because again, he looks significantly different from your average person. But of course, there's a difference. There's a difference between kind of noticing that he looks different, but then also staring at him, right? Or taking pictures of him so you can send it to your friend and say, oh my God, look at this guy or something. That's a very different thing, right? So people are going to look at him because he looks different, and both Adam and his mom understand that. They know that he's going to get an extra look because he appears different. But there's a difference between looking and looking, right? There's a difference between looking at someone and staring at them. And of course, Adam is probably very aware of people's looks in society, and when people are staring at him in a way that makes him uncomfortable, right? And we see, Casey says we see bullying through social media. We see the YouTube comment about that he should have been burned to death at birth, which is a horrible thing to say, but is clear evidence of bullying, but also hate speech, right? Because it calls out the social group he belongs to, right? This thing should happen to him because he belongs to this group, right? And so, you could say something like that and say because they belong to this gender, or because they belong to this sexuality, or because they belong to this race or religion. And all of those things are hate speech, right? It doesn't matter which social group is at the end of the sentence, and it doesn't matter what horrible thing is at the beginning of the sentence. When you say some horrible thing should happen to someone because of the social group they belong to, that's hate speech, right? So Casey, you're very right. We see that. Nobody wants to sit next to him on the bus, right? They have a little hidden camera on the bus, and Adam's just sitting there, going wherever he's going, and people avoid him, right? People give him a very wide, which is interesting, right? Because he's clearly, I think he's a good dresser, right? He's clean, he's nicely dressed, he uses cologne, so he probably smells good. And he's just sitting there on the bus minding his own business, but nobody seems to want to sit by him. And of course, and he will notice that, right? He will notice when people don't sit next to him, just like he's going to notice when people are staring at him a little too long, right? It probably doesn't feel good, I imagine. Although sometimes when you're on the bus, you don't want anyone to sit next to you, right? You want some space to stretch out. You don't want to be squished by somebody else, but still. People make comments about him, and some people get physically attacked. Yeah. Adam lists off a lot of negative things that have been said about him, lots of negative comments people have made, which are awful and hurtful, right? There's also talk about physical attacks, and so Adam says he was in, I think he said he was in Brighton, and somebody tried to like pull at his face because they thought it was a mask, right? And that's awful, right? Don't grab people's faces and try to pull them off. That's a horrible thing to do. But we see some friends that he speaks to as well who have also been physically attacked, right? There's Lucas, the young man with the blonde hair, who was bullied in school. And then there's, his friend, I forget his name, the guy in the bar with the hair over his eye. He was physically attacked as well, right? And the police seemed not too interested in following up on that. Chan says, people don't want to get too close to him, right? Which again is a little surprising, because again, he probably smells really nice and he's dressed really nice, but nobody wants to sit with him. For this question, I'm thinking about specifically the way that people interact with Adam, and I can't remember his name, the young man in the wheelchair, the guy who's the war veteran. They're in the nightclub, they're talking, they're having a beer, and that woman comes up and starts talking to the guy in the wheelchair. And so, I really should remember his name, I missed it. What kind of things are happening there, right? So how does that young man in the wheelchair deal with that woman? Because she's being, while you're answering that, she's really being awful. I don't know if she's been drinking or whatever, or if that has anything to do with it, but she's really being awful, right? So the first thing she does is she walks up to that guy and says, hey, do a wheelie, right? So she wants him to kind of like, lean back in his wheelchair and sort of balance on two wheels. So she's like, do a wheelie, which you don't just walk up to people in public and tell them to do things, right? You don't just walk up to people at the bus stop or at the SkyTrain station and say, hey, do a handstand. You don't just walk up to people and tell them to do things. Like, that's super rude, right? But she does it, right? She walks up to this guy and tells him to perform for her, like a trained dog or something. Awful, right? And then she kind of goes on to, say, oh, what's the matter? Can't you stand? Yeah, no, lady. Like, he's using the wheelchair for fun. Like, really insensitive, right? And so she goes on and makes a few other comments. She's super rude to him. But as Karen points out here, yeah, they kind of use comedy, right? So the guy's like, yeah, I just try to, go along with it, or I make a joke out of it or something. And often that's a response that people in minoritized groups um, use when they're being made to feel uncomfortable, right? When people are, um, when there's a microaggression happening, or when people are saying hurtful things or acting like jerks. Often people in minoritized groups try to laugh it off, or they try to ignore it, right? Um, Erica says they kind of try to mind their own business and act this way. Um, yeah, and I know I brought up internalized oppression at the beginning. Is that internalized oppression? Yeah, I think it might be. It might be, Erica. Um, I think all of us can probably intuitively understand that, when there's a conflict happening, or when somebody upsets you, the easiest thing to do is just ignore it, right? To try and, you know, remove yourself from the situation and just ignore it and move on with your life, right? That's always the easiest thing, usually the easiest thing to do. But um, and that's usually what happens in situations like this. And often, often people who are in minoritized groups might feel uncomfortable standing up for themselves. In some cases, it might be dangerous for them to do so. If you think of the guy with the hair over his eye in the bar, he got punched in the face out of nowhere. And so, it might have been understandable if he wanted to punch the other guy back. But of course, the other guy might have had 5 or 6 friends with him, and then this disabled fellow would have been really hurt, right? So, it's always easier to walk away. It's always easier to not say anything. And often if you do, if people in minoritized groups say, hey, you're being really rude and disrespectful, and, you're making an ableist comment, or you're making a sexist or a racist comment, often the response is, oh, it's just a joke, just relax, I'm just kidding, it's not a big deal, right? And so even when people do raise an issue, and when they do express their feelings, sometimes those feelings aren't validated, and it's the disabled person, or the minoritized person is meant to feel like they're being oversensitive, right? Or they're making a big deal out of nothing, but it's not true. It's not nothing. It's something, right? And so we see that happen in the bar, where what's happening here? We see that happen in the bar where that's strange. We see that happen in the bar, where the woman approaches the two of them, and then proceeds to act in a really insensitive fashion. Okay, here we go. I don't know if we got here or not. But why do disability hate crimes receive more lenient sentences? I don't know if we had an answer to that yet. I'm not sure. I forget in the video if the answer comes after what we watched, or if it was. Do we have an answer for that one? Just remind me, because I know he introduces it. He says that. Actually, maybe we haven't got there yet, but he does say that there seem to be different punishments for different kinds of hate crimes, right? And so Adam says that, if you punch him in the face because he's disabled, you might get up to 6 months in prison. But if you punch someone in the face because they are a certain gender or race or religious orientation, you could get up to 2 years. That's a big difference, right? 6 months or 2 years. And so disability hate crimes seem not to be punished the same way as other types of hate crimes. So Casey says, because not a lot of people are aware of disability hate crimes, and so they're only considered, that's part of it. They say they're only considered a basic offense. Karen says that people don't take them seriously. And we kind of see a little bit of that as well, right? We see that the young man with the hair in the bar. The police didn't seem too interested in tracking down the guy who punched him out of nowhere. When Adam goes to the police station to talk about the hate speech that's on his YouTube channel, people don't see the police don't seem very helpful, right? They tell him, well, you know, the guy didn't say he's going to come to your house, so there's nothing we can do. Go talk to YouTube, right? And of course, YouTube hasn't really done anything, right? Even though their policy on hate speech, they say, is that they have no tolerance for it. But clearly we have some hate speech on Adam's channel, and YouTube doesn't seem to be doing anything about it. So I think you're right there, Karen. Nobody seems to take this very seriously. And so again, things like racism are taken very seriously, right? And Adam points out the football player whose name I forget. Sorry, I should write down everyone's name in this documentary because I don't remember. But the football player was subjected to racist comments on social media, and the guy who made those comments was tracked down and was arrested and charged, right? So people do take racist comments much more seriously than they take comments about someone's disability. And so when racist comments were made about the football player, there were charges, there was police action that happened as a result. When somebody made hateful comments about Adam, everybody kind of shrugged their shoulders and said, oh, well, you know, what can you do, right? But of course you can do something. It's just that people don't seem to see it as important. Okay, so I think that's as far as we got so far, and so. Okay, so what I'll do is watch 10 more minutes. Watch 10 more minutes of the documentary. That'll bring us to 35 minutes total. Answer any more questions that come up, and then that's where we'll start in. That's where we'll start in on Monday. Okay, so just watch 10 minutes more. If there's any answers to the questions in that 10 minutes, then answer them, of course. And then we will, and then we'll do that on Monday. At the moment, before I kind of set you loose to do that, do you have any questions or things you would like me to address? I think I've had some requests to do something on source citation for papers, and so I'll do that on Monday. I'll carve out a little bit of class time and I'll talk about that. But any other pressing questions at the moment? Karen says no. Casey says nope. Erica says no. Okay. Everyone else is obviously typing their big long questions, or they've fallen asleep. One of the two. Sheed says no. Baha says no. Okay. Well, what I'll do then is Thika says no. I will turn you loose. Go watch 10 more minutes of this documentary. Answer any questions you can in that slice. and then we'll pick that up on Monday. If you have any questions over the weekend, you can email or message them to me, and I'll answer them as soon as I am able to. Other than that, I think I'll sign off. So some of you I'll see at 10 o'clock in Comparative Cultures. Some of you I won't see till Monday. So if I don't see you until Monday, I hope you have a really good weekend. Enjoy yourself. Get a little bit of sun. Protect yourself. Stay away from people because you don't want coronavirus. And I'll see you on Monday. Okay. So have a good weekend, people. 10 more minutes of the documentary. We'll pick it up Monday. Have a lovely weekend.